Welcome to the Everybody Matters podcast, a show dedicated to the idea that when organizations care enough to show their people that who they are and what they do matter, they unlock the only business idea with truly unlimited potential. I'm Brent Stewart, your host. This podcast is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. Don't forget to connect with us on the web at Barry-Wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. As strange as it sounds, one of the most overlooked aspects of leadership is seeing the people within your span of care as, well, people. Now think about it. How easy is it to have everyday interactions with others that are purely transactional, where, although completely unintentional, in the moment we have completely disregarded the other person's humanity? We might as well have been interacting with a coffee maker or an ice machine. Again, that way of purely interacting with another person to get something or get them to do something is most often unintentional, but it's part of something deeper. If you pull that thread further, it hits at one of the core problems of leadership: seeing others as objects or functions, tools to be used for my own success. We don't see them as Mary, Allison, or Brent, but engineer, writer, secretary, functions. You may think, well, that's silly. Sometimes I just need to get something from someone else to get a job done. Interaction doesn't require anything more than that. On this week's Everybody Matters podcast, we dig deeper into this topic of seeing others as objects or functions. If we re-examine our hearts, we might find that there's a lot of truth in this. This podcast is sort of a third in a trilogy of podcasts with David Vandermolen, our learning sensei at Barry-Wehmiller University. I encourage you to go back and listen to the previous episodes with David, titled The Shape of Leadership and The Swag Bag of Leadership. There's a lot of insight that builds to this episode. And so now, here's David Vandermolen.
One of the things I've taught my boys, I have a 19-year-old son, Hunter, and a 22-year-old son, Bridge. And if you were to know them or to run upon them, on the shooting range or at a gas station, and said, hey, I hear you're David's kids. So what's he taught you about leadership? They have a mantra. They know what to say. They might chuckle and laugh because they've heard it said 1,000 times. Leaders take care of people. At the core of truly human leadership is this concept of taking care of people. One of the words we use to describe that here is we are really charged with the awesome responsibility to steward the lives that are given to us, right? So that's kind of like that overarching statement. But what we don't talk about, to get to your question, is that underneath that is something deeper, really profound. It's the idea that if I'm going to be a truly human leader, I have to see people as they truly are, as people and not as objects. And that sounds simplistic in some sense, but we've come to learn that that has significant impact on how I lead and whether I am truly human in my leadership.
So why is this concept and this deeper idea so important?
Well, so years ago, well over 8 now, we stumbled across something that was a new insight for me and many of us within the university. It was a concept that was created through a significant amount of work done by an organization called the Arbinger Institute. They have several books that are in publication today. One of them, which we kind of really looked into and really struck a chord with us, was a book called Leadership and Self-Deception. The basic gist of the book is this: that there are only 2 ways of being. Meaning, I'm going to see people as they are, truly as people, who are equally legitimate, as valid, as I am and my needs and my fears are, or I'm going to see them, if I see them as people at all, less than a person. Their needs are less than mine, not quite as important as mine. Their fears are maybe real, but mine are just a little bit more real, more tangible, more important, more significant. So this notion of seeing others as people and the objectification of people is huge. And you'd think it's, I don't do that. But the reality is, we do. And the degree to which we do it, how much of my actual engagement with other people falls into the category of seeing that other, whether it's a TSA agent traveling, the clerk at my local gas station, my spouse, my sons, as an object or a person. It's surprising how often I don't even see those who are closest to me, who I love the dearest, as truly human, as people just like me, equally legitimate as me.
So it doesn't really seem too realistic to just think that there's only two ways of being. Like, it seems a little closed-minded or a little bit too on the nose in a sense. There's got to be a middle ground there, right? There's got to be, it's not just black and white. There's got to be some gray there, right?
Wouldn't that be great? So the popular answer would be, yes, there is. And it's called, and I were to fill in that blank for you. But here's the reality. It's not. I am, from morning to night, in one way of being or another. I'm either seeing those I'm engaging with as people, or I'm seeing the people I engage with as just a means to an end, an object. And what's interesting is, for those of us within Barry-Wehmiller know that we're a little bit big on this notion called listening, and that's important that leaders listen. And truly human leadership at the core has this concept of, as a leader, one of my core responsibilities is not to transmit, but to listen, right? But here's the deal. I can use the 5 skills of listening that we teach, and I can do the skills, practice them. But if my way of being is I'm just doing the listening to an object, it's going to come across way differently than if I'm actually having empathy, seeing you as a real person with real needs, real hopes, real fears, equally legitimate as me, and then I apply the skills. Now, if I'm in that frame of mind, that orientation toward others, the dynamic is so different. And so it would be great, right, if there was the third category. But I'm fully aware that I'm either in one or the other mode. And I don't want to tell you how often through the day I know I'm in a mode that says I'm actually not seeing others as people. They're an object right now. And I also know what it's like to be on the receiving end of that.
So give us an example of what it's like to be on the receiving end of that.
Sure. So this is not characteristic of the airline, nor is it characteristic of flight attendants in general. So I want to be clear about that, because I typically don't have this experience. This is why it stands out for me. I tend to fly Southwest. The other day, I boarded a plane, and the flight attendant, with a smile, said, "Good morning." But what I noticed, and it was obvious, everyone could tell. It's not like I have some mystical ability to read, the nonverbal communication of other people. We all knew. It was perfunctory. She was doing duty. Now, again, not characteristic of most of the flight attendants I engage with in Southwest. Actually, it's quite the opposite. Maybe that's why it stood out, right? But when she said what she said all the right words. She said them in the right tone of voice, even with the right facial expression. Yet, it was just clear. It was perfunctory. It was just, this is what I'm supposed to say, and that's it. Simple example, not even really associated with leadership, but just very, very true.
So, talk about a time in your leadership journey where, I mean, this is not necessarily easy, but let's talk about a time in your leadership journey where you were clearly objectifying another person.
Sure. I can go as far as back as last night. I don't have to dig too deep. The memory's fresh in my mind. I was concerned you might ask me that, so I was thinking about it. Left a party early, was with a few colleagues, and we kind of wanted a little bit more to eat and a little more to drink. We stopped off at a place, it's a local restaurant just a few blocks from here. I could not tell you who the waitress's name was. I could not give you more than a couple of descriptors of her physical appearance. For me, in that moment where I was, it's not my most noble moment, mind you. The message I was sending is, you are merely just a means for me getting a hamburger and a fry. And that message was clearly sent. The way I engaged with her, the way she responded back, all of that was really characteristic of me seeing her less than a person, less important than me, and just a means to my getting food in my stomach. And again, there's nothing noble about that, and nor is it the way I want to be. And so at times I forget that I'm engaging with another person. And in that context, I certainly treated this other person as less than important than me. And frankly, I don't know that I was even orientated in my head to thinking this was a person. And that's terrible to say as a person who's an advocate of truly human leadership, but it's real. And the problem is I know what it is like to engage with my 19-year-old son and listen to him, and I'm listening to him as if he is my son who I love. I also know what it's like to listen to my 19-year-old son, who maybe is going on about a particular adventure game he and his friends like to play that is I'm kind of losing track of, and then all of a sudden I realize I'm just kind of pretending to listen, and I'm not really valuing him in that moment as the son that I love. And I slip out of that mode of being really other-centered and seeing the other as a person into now just objectifying them. And what's shocking to me as I've attempted to practice this for the last 10 to 15 years is the degree to which I still struggle to see others as people.
You know, that's a good example. That's a very relatable, everyday example that people can relate to, because we go to restaurants quite often. You know,
Sure.
It's an experience that you have when you have somebody there who is to wait on you, to serve you. It's very relatable. In the context of work, it's sometimes harder to think of it in those terms sometimes, because we don't think about the amount of times that we might have a leader that comes to us and says, just do this.
Yeah.
I mean, we're there to do the work,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes the leader doesn't realize how what they're doing comes across.
Yes.
You know, because they're in some situations like that, they're using you as a means to an end. Now, again, you're there to do the work. You're there to serve the leader. The leader's there to serve you. Both of those things are true, but we don't often realize how those situations can become transactional.
Absolutely.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm fully aware at times that I have been trying to organize a project I'm working on with a few of my colleagues, and there's maybe a dependency I have to get something from my colleague or to give something to my colleague. I know when and this could be on a Skype call, this could be on a phone call face-to-face, I know when I engage with them and I am remembering I'm talking to a person who I care about, who is as equally important in this project as I am, who has needs and fears and apprehensions about its progress or its success, and who also wants to be celebrated and take the win. I know when I'm engaging with them, and that's kind of like floating in my mind. And so my engagement reflects that. It's more authentic, more real. I come off to them as I want to be human because I'm engaging with them as they are human, right? It's interesting how that, like, we talk about, what truly human leadership, and the complete inverse might be inhumane leadership, right? Well, we all know the leader who's like, let's say their shape is top down and they bark commands and they yell from their office and they point and they're demand or petulant in the way they engage with their team members. That's clearly not a truly human leadership. The challenge is the subtle component, right? Not the stuff that stands out. It's the subtle stuff. It's in that moment just taking the time to realize my colleague over here who just wants me to complete this project with this certain order to it on time, they have skin in the game too. It matters to them. And it's that sense of seeing them as equal, legitimate, same skin in the game as I have that is huge. And it makes all, and by the way, I can't hide that with, I'll just smile more, or I'll say please. Because behavior will never mask or make my way of being go away. I'm either in a state of being where I see others as people, or I see them as objects. If I see them, this is a kicker, if I even see them at all.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Does that help?
Yeah. So going back to the restaurant analogy, those people, we go to a restaurant and a person is there to serve us. That's their job.
Correct.
But what's wrong with the interaction that you had there? Like, what's wrong with that? Why does it matter? It's just kind of incidental. It's part of the job, part of the situation, part of the expectation. The impact is contained to that moment. What's wrong with that?
You would think it is, right? So the impression we have is, so here's one moment where I'm not as noble or as truly human as a leader as I want to be, and so that happened and it kind of went away. Well, there's a certain truth to that, but the reality is this: if I somehow see you as less than you are, objectify you, what occurs in you is then you will do the same to me. And we'll get caught in this loop of mutual mistreatment. A really classic example of this would be something that we're all probably familiar with if we do any kind of social networking. And if you ever were to read some of the things that people post on Facebook or on Twitter, you would never say that out loud to a person.
Yeah, we dehumanize the interaction experience through social media because it's on a page, it's not in front of us.
Absolutely. But what's interesting is we do that with people face to face, but we're just incredibly clever and professional and suave at masking it. But people know. This afternoon, I had lunch at a restaurant just down the street. My waitress, her name is Abby. Tim is the concierge. He's the guy that seated me. He has my name. I've has his name now. And what's interesting about our engagement was the moment he asked me my name, I asked his name, and we started to share, it changed the dynamic. About 7-8 minutes later, after he plated, my lunch, he walked by and said, "David, how's that pasta?" And I said, "Tim, it's great." That's a different engagement. I was engaging with a guy named Tim, who happens to be the concierge at a local restaurant. And he engaged with one of his, restaurateurs, or a guy who wants to go and enjoy a nice meal, whose name is David, a real person. And we go back to something that's core to all that we speak about within Barry-Wehmiller University and underpinning truly human leadership. And it's this: I am the message, right? Everything I say, everything I do. And I don't like this statement sometimes, right? When I'm on message, it's great. When I'm off message, seeing others as object, it's not so good. But I am a message. I'm sending a message to the world. And I think, part of our mission, the long line, the arrow looking ahead with what we're trying to accomplish to change the world, through business, making it a better place, through this whole notion of truly human leadership, is to say, look, I'm a message. So that does count. My engagement with Abby and Tim, that adds up to saying Barry-Wehmiller and truly human leadership actually works. It makes a positive impact in the workplace and during lunch. And so for me, it's huge. And it's that mutual mistreatment, the need for me then to justify my behavior. And then I start going to somebody else. If I mistreat someone, if I, in a sense, dishonor my deepest sense of right and don't treat you as a person, if I objectify you, what happens then is I can't do that without having a reason. I've got to justify it. And unless you're a sociopath, you have a need to justify behavior. So I must therefore justify why I objectified you. And then I might find somebody else to join in with me, to collude. And then together we could mutually mistreat you. And then I horribilize you. And what happens then is I paint a picture that isn't even tied to reality. I fabricate a story to justify my behavior that has nothing to do with the other. It has to do with me failing myself. Thus the title of the book, right? Leadership and self-deception. So I think for me, it's way more, it has way more ripples and has way more impact than we realize.
So if we're going to accept this kind of premise that you're putting out here, and then think about it in all the different parts of our lives, we could come to the conclusion that we're just pretty awful people. I mean, yeah. Because these interactions happen so many times a day, very often, not just at work, at home, at the gas station, at a restaurant, grocery store, whatever. So what are we supposed to do with that?
Well, I think this is kind of it's a beautiful paradox, if I could maybe describe it this way. It's the fact that and when you become aware that I am not seeing my son right now as a person, I'm devaluing them. My colleague here, I'm just trying to get my thing done through them, really don't see them as they truly are, equal, legitimate share. And we know, and it's when we develop that, I guess, response to when we become aware, right, is where I think that's the beautiful paradox. I don't like the reality that this is true of me, that I tend to see others as objects. I don't like that, but it's true, 100% true. I think there's a sense of when we own that, it's also empowering to say, okay, if that's the case, how then do I stop that? Because that is there's no way that's productive. So how then do I see others as equally legitimate, as real, as important as I am? How do I see that? How do I do that? Well, it's having that moment of clarity of going, I know what I'm doing here, and to switch, to literally switch. I find through the literature that we've studied in preparation of kind of integrating this concept into what we teach about truly human leadership, the most helpful concept for me is to when I'm aware, I can change that right now and stop objectifying people. And I have had instances where I've been in an airplane and I'm fully aware that I am blocking, trying to protect my seat. I don't want someone to sit next to me. And so I've had opportunities when I realize I need to change that. Like, that's all about me. And I could care less about the other person's need, who has to get home to see their family like I do too. When I become aware of that, to me, that's the moment of redemption, one might say. That's the moment of real change, is to be aware, and then to go, oh, okay, there's a better way. And so but I do think before we can make that change, we have to face the dilemma that's true about us, that long look in the mirror. I do this, and I do it way more than I would care for people to know. And but when I don't, and I choose to see others and engage with others as they truly are, people just like me, equally legitimate and as important, the kind of energy I push out into the world and the way that reflects in my leadership, well, heck, people will follow you into hell with a squirt gun when you lead that way.
So how do you do that? How do you change? How do you stop objectifying people? What do you do?
I'll go back to something we teach. Exercise the power to pause. To be aware in that moment, and when you are, to stop and begin to see them as people. I've been in meetings before where I am fully aware at a certain point in the meeting, I am not seeing anybody on my team who I'm working with this project as people who have equal legitimate hopes, fears, and desires as I do. Same amount of skin in the game, not even seeing that. And I shift. I step out of being blinded by my own self-deception. I make that moment to go, okay, stop, wait. That's not how I want to be. That's not the way I want to be with my colleagues right now. It's as complex and as simple as that. It's being aware, and out of that awareness, taking the action to say, now I'm going to see you as you are. And there's also often a need for a lot of, hey, I'm sorry. It's not, I was coming across the wrong way here, and I was really not paying attention to what you needed there, and I apologize. So, sorry. I mean, to me, it's that complex. It's that simple.
Yeah. Can we have just purely transactional interactions?
We do. We have many transactional engagements with people. The question is that truly human leadership? Is that the message we want to send to the world? Is that who we want to be? Do we aspire to be something, better than that? And the people I want to follow, the people, I'll charge into the flames with, are the men and women who, when they're engaging with me, their leadership of me is characteristic, never always going to be on point, right? But characteristic of seeing me as I truly am, a person, equally legitimate as they are.
So, kind of wrapping everything up now, how has this impacted your leadership? How has this impacted, how are these realizations impacting the way you go out into the world as a leader day to day?
Before I came down here, I made a choice to prepare myself to engage with you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Because I know that you have as much skin in this game as I do with this podcast. I wanted to hear what you had to say. I cared about you. So I'm gonna choose to see you in this moment as you really are. This is the important piece, right? As you really are. Truly human. Equally legitimate. Same hopes, same fears, same skin in the game. So why would I not engage with you as a fellow human here on the planet? Not someone who's less than me, a technician who's running a mic. I mean, I probably could have came in here with that mindset, but I know you. And that's not how I want to be with you. I think a lot of it goes back to saying, for me, what message do I want to send? And I want to send a message that says, I'm a leader, which means one thing to two boys who live in Western Michigan. I care about you. At the core of truly human leadership is care. It's at the core. John Maxwell years ago said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. There could be no statement more apropos at this moment, right? That's it. It matters if you care. And it's so easy to be careless or to not care. But it comes down to that, I think. Because humans are supposed to care for each other.
And think about how much companies would change if we get rid of transactional interactions across the board.
It would be night and day difference. Not only for creating the kind of culture that people would be like kind of excited to get out of bed and go to work, like eager to get in their car, rush through the Starbucks line so they can get to their cube. Wouldn't that be cool? More than that though, right? Imagine how much more an organization, whether it's a small mom and pop operation of 14 people in some small pole barn on the backside of nowhere, or a 13,000 person organization that's spread across the globe like Barry-Wehmiller. Imagine the kind of productivity and performance you would have when people truly understood, I care for you, you care for me, I see you as you are, a human. That would affect how we looked at things like work hours, work-life balance. It would affect things of how we think about compensation, pay for performance. It would affect things like how we looked at honoring and creating promotion for people. It would look at things like how do we provide security, and how do we think as a leader to make sure our vision and the business platform we build is the right kind of business to ensure security for people who they got to pay a mortgage with our paycheck. We better take care of them. They're people. They're people. And man, if we could have that happen, yeah, it would be amazing.
Thanks for listening to the Everybody Matters podcast. If you'd like to find out more about Bob Chapman and Ralph Zodia's book, Everybody Matters, The Extraordinary Power of Caring for Your People Like Family, go to everybodymattersbook.com. For updates on the book, this podcast, and get a lot of great content and insight, don't forget to connect with us on the web at barry-wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening. Don't forget, Everybody Matters is the only business idea with truly unlimited potential.